It was supposed to be a routine first-class flight from Los Angeles to New York, just another quiet trip through the clouds. But everything changed at 37,000 feet when a flight attendant, clearly annoyed, questioned a young black teen's right to sit in first class. That teen was Jaden Cole, the 17-year-old son of Elijah Cole, one of the most influential black CEOs in America. When Jaden politely asked for a glass of water and accidentally spilled a few drops, the tension boiled over, and in front of shocked passengers the flight attendant slapped him across the face. She had no idea who she was dealing with. With one calm phone call, Jaden activated a powerful protocol built to expose and respond to discrimination instantly. By the time the plane touched down, federal agents were already on the tarmac. Cameras rolled. Passengers held their breath. Within minutes, the entire flight crew was detained and under investigation. What followed sparked headlines, outrage, and a powerful reminder that real strength often speaks in silence. It was a warm, clear afternoon at Los Angeles International Airport. The buzz of travelers echoed through Terminal 4 as Flight 729 to New York City prepared for takeoff. Families bustled with carry-ons, business travelers typed furiously on their phones, and airline staff made routine boarding announcements over the PA system. Nothing about the day felt out of the ordinary, at least not yet. Among the early boarders was Jaden Cole, a soft-spoken, sharply dressed 17-year-old flying alone. He wore a tailored navy hoodie, a pair of designer sneakers, and carried a sleek leather backpack slung casually over one shoulder. To most people, he looked like just another well-off teen headed back to boarding school or visiting family for the weekend. But Jaden was no ordinary passenger. He was the only son of Elijah Cole, the billionaire tech magnate and former U.S. ambassador who had graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and even Wired. Elijah was a legend in both Silicon Valley and Washington, a self-made genius who had built a global tech empire focused on cybersecurity and AI ethics. Quiet by nature, Jaden had inherited his father's poise, calm demeanor, and sharp intuition. Though he didn't flaunt his last name, it carried serious weight in the right circles. Jaden stepped into the first-class cabin and found his seat, 1A, a window spot near the front. As he settled in, he offered a polite nod to an older woman seated across the aisle, then adjusted his headphones. The atmosphere was peaceful, until she arrived. Flight attendant Stacy Whitmore made her way down the aisle with a clipboard in one hand, and a half-hearted smile on her face. Stacy had worked this route for years. She prided herself on knowing what her first class should look like, who fit in and who didn't. And something about Jaden didn't sit right with her. She slowed her steps as she passed his row, then turned back, feigning a helpful tone. "Hi there," she said, leaning slightly forward. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Jaden removed one earbud and looked up calmly. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, then held out his boarding pass. His name, seat number, and first-class designation were printed clearly, no mistake. Stacy scanned it, her face tightening for just a moment. Then she gave a curt nod and walked away without another word. But the moment lingered in the air. A businessman 2 rows behind furrowed his brow. The older woman across from Jaden exchanged a glance with a younger flight attendant, who had seen the whole thing. You could feel it, not just the microaggression, but the silence that followed. The kind of silence that said, "We've seen this before." Jaden didn't react. He simply put his earbud back in and returned to his music. But inside, he clocked everything. Her tone, the way she looked at him, the judgment in her voice. He'd been through this before, too many times. As more passengers boarded, Stacy continued her routine, offering drinks and storing bags, but her eyes kept drifting back to Jaden. Whether it was discomfort, disbelief, or something more personal, she couldn't seem to let it go. And though Jaden didn't know it yet, this would not be the last time she challenged him on this flight. Over the intercom, the captain's voice crackled through the cabin. "Welcome aboard Flight 729 non-stop to New York. Please buckle up and enjoy the ride." But for Jaden, and everyone in first class, the real turbulence hadn't even begun. Roughly an hour into the flight, the hum of the aircraft had lulled most passengers into a state of quiet relaxation. Some sipped champagne, others watched movies, and a few drifted off to sleep in their reclined seats. Jaden Cole sat with his earbuds in, staring out the window at the clouds rolling below. It was peaceful for a while, then he pressed the call button. A few seconds later, Stacy Whitmore appeared, wearing the same strange smile she'd worn during boarding. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, but her eyes held that same look of cold suspicion, like Jaden's presence still didn't sit right with her. "Yeah?" she asked sharply, barely disguising her impatience. "Just a glass of water, please," Jaden said politely, removing one earbud and giving a quick, courteous nod. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the galley. She returned moments later with a small plastic cup of water, not on a napkin, not on a tray, just a lukewarm cup, carelessly handed off. Jaden reached for it, but as he grasped the cup, it slipped slightly in the exchange, not enough to spill on her, just a small splash that hit the tray table and his pant leg. He reacted quickly, grabbing a napkin from the side pouch to clean it up, but Stacy's reaction was instant and explosive. "You people don't know how to behave in first class," she snapped, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. The words pierced through the quiet cabin like a siren. Several heads turned immediately. Jaden blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Stacy leaned in, her face twisted with indignation, and slapped him hard across the face. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp crack of skin against skin. Jaden's head turned slightly from the impact, and the entire cabin froze. Mouths dropped. A man 2 rows behind took out his phone and immediately began recording. The older woman across from Jaden let out a gasp. One younger flight attendant in the corner stood completely still, eyes wide, unsure what to do. Jaden didn't move. He stared at Stacy, stunned but composed. His cheek reddened, but his eyes didn't water. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he reached calmly into his jacket pocket, pulled out a phone and unlocked it with a fingerprint. Passengers waited, some still unsure what they'd just seen. Others were murmuring, a few speaking up. What the hell just happened? Did she just hit him? Someone call the pilot. This isn't okay. But Stacy acted as if nothing had happened. She stood there, chest heaving slightly, then turned away, as if slapping a teenager in first class was normal. Jaden tapped a black and white icon on his phone, an app that didn't exist on the public app store. It opened instantly, and a secure interface appeared. He pressed a single button and raised the phone to his lips. "It's happened again." That was all he said, just 3 words. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, deep in a high-security server, the system attached to that phrase went live. Data began flowing. Flight number, GPS coordinates, cabin security logs, passenger manifests, and even audio recordings from Jaden's phone. The system had been built by his father for situations exactly like this. Jaden tucked his phone away, sat back in his seat, and folded his hands in his lap. He wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid, he was waiting, and above him, the aircraft continued slicing through the clouds, unaware that when it landed, nothing would ever be the same. While Flight 729 quietly cruised over Ohio, more than 1,000 miles away in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Manhattan, Elijah Cole was mid-presentation. Surrounded by board members and legal advisors, he stood at the head of the table, calm, composed, and in control. His phone vibrated once. Greyhawk protocol triggered. Level 1 incident. Subject, Jaden Cole. Elijah stopped mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed for only a second. Without saying a word, he reached for the device, scanned the screen, then turned to his assistant. "Activate protocol Greyhawk, now." The room fell silent. Greyhawk wasn't just a system, it was a private response network, custom-built by Elijah's security firm, combining AI surveillance, legal response teams, and government liaison. It had been created after Elijah himself had been wrongfully detained years earlier, and it had never needed full activation, until now. Across the country, the protocol came to life. A legal team was dispatched to JFK Airport. A private cybersecurity server began uploading data collected from Jaden's phone and synced cabin footage. Simultaneously, 2 silent alerts went to the FAA and Homeland Security, where Elijah had long-standing strategic partnership. And while the world below kept spinning, Flight 729 began its descent into New York. Back in the cabin, passengers stirred from naps and packed away headphones, but the atmosphere had changed. Whispers traveled faster than the flight crew could contain them. Some had seen the slap, others had heard the racial remark, a few were still watching the incident on repeat in a video being shared across private group chats. It was spreading faster than the turbulence. Then a soft chime echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked to hold briefly at the gate for final coordination with ground personnel. We appreciate your patience." Passengers exchanged confused looks. Jaden, calm as ever, stared out the window. That's when they saw the flashing lights. Police cruisers, black SUVs, unmarked white vans, all stationed just beyond Gate 1 at 17 at JFK. A ripple of tension swept through the cabin. "Are we being greeted by the FBI?" someone muttered. Moments later, the plane died. The seatbelt sign turned off, but the doors didn't open. The air was thick with silence. Then suddenly, the cabin door swung open, and 4 federal agents in suits stepped onto the plane. Behind them, two uniformed Homeland Security officers. The lead agent held up a badge and said clearly, "This is Homeland Security. We need the flight attendants to step forward. Now." The words landed like thunder. The crew froze. Stacy Whitmore blinked rapidly, her forced smile twitching. "Is this some kind of prank?" she asked, laughing nervously. "What is this about?" But the agents weren't smiling. Without warning, one of the officers stepped forward and gently but firmly pulled Stacy's hands behind her back and placed her in handcuffs. Her expression shattered. "What the hell? I didn't do anything," she cried. "You can't do this. I didn't touch anyone." But a passenger stood up. "Actually, I saw everything, and I've got the video." Gasps rippled across the cabin as 3 more flight attendants were escorted off. Not arrested, but detained for questioning as potential witnesses or accomplices. No one could believe what they were seeing. A child whispered to her mother, "Why are they taking the people who work here?" Jaden remained seated, silent, composed. The agents didn't speak to him. They didn't need to. They knew exactly who he was. As the agents exited with the crew in custody, one turned back briefly and nodded toward Jaden, not in apology, but in acknowledging, but ins wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't going away quietly, and as the passengers finally began to disembark, most were still too stunned to speak. Flight 729 had landed, but the storm had just begun. Within hours of Flight 729 landing at JFK, the internet was on fire. The video, just 10 seconds long, showed Stacy Whitmore slapping a black teenager in first class, followed by shocked gasps, and the unmistakable silence of stunned passengers. Someone had uploaded it to TikTok. Another shared it on Twitter. Within 2 hours, it had been reposted on major Instagram accounts, Reddit threads, and news blogs. The caption read, "Flight attendant slaps teen in first class. Then the FBI shows up." But the real shock came not from the video, but from what happened next. Mainstream media outlets picked up the story, initially calling it a confrontation, but as Jaden's identity was confirmed, the narrative changed. He wasn't just a teenager on a plane, he was the son of Elijah Cole, a name that demanded respect in both corporate and political spheres. And when Elijah finally made a brief statement outside his Manhattan office, the words were clear: no one is above the law, and no child, regardless of skin color, should feel unsafe at 37,000 feet. That quote led every headline the next morning. But behind the scenes, even bigger truths were surfacing. An emergency internal audit by the airline, launched in response to Elijah's legal team and federal intervention, revealed a disturbing pattern. Stacy Whitmore had been the subject of at least 5 prior complaints over the last 7 years. All involved racially biased behavior, most centered around young Black or Latino men in first or business class. Words like attitude, suspicious, and uncooperative littered the reports. The airline had done what many corporations do: quietly settle minor reprimands, shuffled schedules, legal waivers signed with NDAs, no terminations, no consequence. But this time, it wasn't behind closed doors. Elijah's Greyhawk protocol had been designed precisely for moments like this, not just to record abuse, but to automatically trigger legal and governmental oversight. The moment Jaden's phone sent that signal, Greyhawk began compiling encrypted logs, GPS data, cabin audio, captured via his phone's mic, and a synced, time-stamped passenger list. More importantly, it alerted a coalition of federal agencies and civil rights attorneys who had partnered with Elijah's foundation after a series of racial discrimination cases in transportation. That meant the footage, the witness statements, and the audio recordings didn't sit in a legal inbox. They were in the hands of regulators within the hour. And now the entire flight crew, not just Stacy, was under investigation. Federal authorities were examining whether other crew members had witnessed the assault and done nothing, or if their silence and failure to intervene constituted complicity. There was even speculation that some had erased security notes from the flight log, a federal offense if proved. As public outrage grew, the airline CEO was forced to speak out. In a tightly controlled press conference, he appeared visibly shaken. "We are conducting a full investigation into the actions of our staff on Flight 7. Let me be clear, we do not tolerate discrimination in any form." But it was too late. Sponsors were pulling advertising. Shareholders were furious. Meanwhile, interviews with former passengers surfaced. More young men, some with tearful stories of similar encounters with Stacy. Their experiences had never made it to the public, until now, and all of it pointed to one chilling truth. Stacy Whitmore wasn't just having a bad day, she was part of a pattern, one the airline had allowed to fester. In her mugshot, taken just hours after landing, her forced smile was gone. The mask had fallen. And for the first time, thanks to a calm teenager and one three-word phone call, the world was finally watching. By morning, Stacey Whitmore's mugshot had been splashed across every major news outlet in the country. Her face, once composed, polished, and in control, now looked exhausted, stunned, and stripped of the authority she once abused. The caption beneath her photo read, "Flight attendant detained after onboard assault goes viral." Social media erupted. The hashtag Justice for Jayden began trending worldwide. Celebrities, activists, politicians, and thousands of everyday travelers weighed in. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination in air travel. Others were simply horrified that a trained flight attendant could strike a child in front of witnesses and walk away like nothing had happened. But she hadn't walked away. Within 48 hours, the airline CEO, under enormous pressure from civil rights organizations, regulatory agencies, and the court of public opinion, stepped in front of cameras. Wearing a dark suit and a visibly strained expression, he addressed the nation. "We failed. What happened to Jayden Cole should never happen to anyone. On behalf of this airline, I personally apologize to Mr. Cole and to his family. We are reviewing all internal protocols, and effective immediately. Several members of senior management have resigned. 3 top executives, the VP of Customer Experience, the Director of In-Flight Operations, and Stacey's direct supervisor, were all gone by the end of the week. But the world was waiting to hear from one person, Jayden Cole. He had remained silent through the chaos, shielded from the media by his father's security and a tight inner circle. But on the 5th day, a short video appeared on Elijah Cole's verified YouTube channel. It was just under 2 minutes long. In the video, Jayden sat on a simple stool in a sunlit room. No music, no dramatic lighting, just his quiet presence and a camera. "I didn't ask for this," he began. "I was just trying to get home." He paused for a moment, his voice steady but thoughtful. "What happened to me has happened to a lot of people. I was lucky because I had support. I had a system in place. Most people don't, and if this moment can stop it from happening to someone else, then it was worth it." He ended with a small smile, barely more than a whisper. "Sometimes, the most powerful call you make is the quiet one." That line was instantly quoted across media platforms. It became a rallying cry, a meme, a mantra for a movement. The Cole family didn't sue, they didn't have to. The federal investigation was already well underway. Stacey faced pending charges of assault, hate crime enhancements, and violation of federal air safety regulation. She had also become the subject of civil rights litigation from passengers and former victims who had seen their chance to finally speak up. As for the rest of the crew, all had been placed on indefinite suspension, pending the outcome of the investigation. One had already agreed to cooperate, claiming Stacey had a history of offhand racial comments, and had warned colleagues about passengers who looked out of place. The silence from the others was deafening, and legally dangerous. The airline implemented a new training program, built with help from Elijah's foundation, centered around implicit bias, accountability, and passenger dignity. But critics said it came too late, because this story was never just about a slap. It was about power used quietly, but effectively. About a boy who didn't yell, didn't fight, but instead acted with intelligence and grace. About a system that for once worked, because it had been built by someone who'd lived through injustice, and refused to let it repeat. Jayden went back to school the next week, trying to return to a normal life. But in homes, schools, courtrooms, and boardrooms across the country, his story was still being told. And as for Flight 729, its legacy will never be found on a boarding pass. It lives in the pages of policy reform, in the hearts of those it inspired, and in the reminder that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. And for those who thought they could get away with injustice, at 37,000 feet, they now know, some passengers aren't just passengers. What happened on Flight 729 wasn't just about one boy or one slap. It became a symbol of quiet resistance, smart preparation, and the power of speaking up, without ever raising your voice. Jayden Cole reminded the world that dignity doesn't need to shout, and justice, when armed with the right tools, can land harder than any act of violence ever could. His story is a call to rethink how we respond, how we protect, and how we listen, even when the world tries to silence. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful, true inspired stories, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay aware, stay strong, and stay grounded.